Hello and welcome to our live series, Ask the Experts. My name's Grace Farrell, and today it is the 1 year deadline until PPI claims have to be in. So we've got Gareth Shaw from Which Money and Anker from MoneySavingExpert with me in the studio to answer your questions on PPI. We're going to be talking about exactly what it is, who's eligible, and how you can claim for free. So if you'd like to get in touch, just comment below with your questions and I will put them to our specialists and we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. So let's start off just by explaining exactly what PPI is. Guy, could you give us a summary,
Sure.
please?
It's a bit of a, I think it's got a bit of a bad reputation, a bit of a dirty word. PPI itself isn't necessarily bad. It's insurance to cover credit cards, loans, mortgage payments if you can't work normally because of accident, sickness or unemployment.
Right.
The problem is how it was sold. This has essentially been the biggest financial scandal, certainly in my lifetime, because we're talking tens of billions of pounds of PPI missold, wrongly taken from people. So it is insurance. It's not bad in its own right. The way it was sold was terrible.
And you used to sell it, is that right?
I did. When I was a student, this would have been late 90s, early 2000s. I worked at a big bank, essentially earning pocket money when I was there. I was in their call centre for credit cards, taking balance inquiry calls, and I want to transfer money, standard calls. We were heavily incentivised, untrained as well, I would add, to push PPI.
Really?
This was before the real scandal was uncovered. So you're talking, it's a long time ago now, nearly 20 years ago. I can actually remember the conference, the FSA at the time, when they first highlighted the problem in 2005. I was there. So this was a good 5 or 6 years before. We knew it wasn't right, but we were students predominantly.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, earning our beer money. We were I remember taking Thresher's vouchers. That's how we were incentivised. And there was I remember this great big board on the side, and you went up, next to your name when you put a tick there when you sold. But looking back at it, I remember taking calls from branch staff from this bank, and they had customers with them. And this really highlights the problem, because they would say, customers with me, and they said no to PPI, but there's a little tick in the box that said yes.
Really?
I've got a piece of paper here. I mean, it would have been the tiniest part, the smallest part of the application form, little box ticket. It sounds so innocuous, but 5, 6, 7, 8,000 pounds later, it ain't innocuous.
No.
But I can remember talking to friends and family about PPI at the time, like, don't do it.
Yeah. But it sounds like even if they said no, they'd probably still be signed up for it.
Exactly. So, when it all came out 5 or 6 years later, I was a financial journalist, initially working for an insurance title at the time. And I remember pushing on my editor at the time, we've got to cover this. This is a scandal.
Yeah.
And it took a bit of convincing and got there in the end. It all came out in the wash later, but the tactics were poor. We were untrained. We were students. We didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And we were also given wrong information. I can remember people self-employed, and we were told to say, I can't remember the exact line, but essentially, you're okay, you can have it. But actually, I found out later when I became a journalist, no, they weren't covered for unemployment. But we weren't told that when we were selling it. And the pressure to sell it was huge.
I bet they regret that now. I mean, banks have given out 31 billion so far.
It's great being on the side now.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that.
It's a great anecdote, really, and informs what you do.
When you understand what was really going on, but I can see the pressure we were under, untrained students. It's good to be able to help get more of this 31 billion back.
Absolutely.
So why is there a deadline now?
This scandal has been rumbling on for years and years. As you say, the banks have paid out £31 billion. Awareness of the issue is incredibly high. If you don't hear about people like Guy and myself talking about you should make a PPI claim if you're eligible, you've probably had text messages on your phone from companies you've never heard of, phone calls during the morning, noon and night from companies you've never heard of, adverts plastered all over your commute newspapers, your daytime television programmes from claims management companies saying that they can help you get your PPI back. And so I think the regulator has recognised, and it must be said, there's probably been quite a bit of pressure from the banks now who have been shelling out huge amounts of money to pay back customers, that customers should be aware that if they do have a PPI claim that they should be making it. And so it's looking to really draw a line in the sand and say, right, this is the point where we're going to put this horrible chapter to a close and get a deadline out there. And that was introduced last year. So there's been a 2-year countdown, and now we're 12 months.
1 year away. I mean, is there any way of knowing how many people might be out there who are still owed PPI?
It's very difficult to put a number on it. I can remember when these numbers first started coming out from what was the Financial Services Authority at the time, now the Financial Conduct Authority. It was 1 billion, then it was 5, then it was 10. Where's it going to end?
Yeah.
Honestly, can't tell you where it's going to end, but I'm sure it's billions more. But one thing I really want to get across to anyone watching is there is a year to go, but don't think, I can sit back and I can wait. A couple of reasons why. In some cases, there's already a big backlog at the Financial Ombudsman. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about what the Ombudsman is in a moment. And some are taking many months to get through. Some are quicker, but quite frankly, publicity like this, more are going to come through, which we hope. Earlier you get your claim in, the quicker, you hopefully miss as much of the backlog as possible. But also just the psychology of it. If you're in that moment and you want to claim and you don't, we hear it all the time, people saying, I didn't get around to it.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about it, we'll tell you in a minute how to do it. Do it. It's your money that they took thousands of pounds. I mean, I'm looking, the biggest claim we've seen was £153,000.
Really?
That's extreme. I'm not, you're talking multiple cards and loans over a number of years, but typically £3,000, I'd say, is a fairly normal sum we see. There's a lot of money here a lot of money at stake.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The people that have been using our tool online on average have been getting around £1,500 back, and that's not money to be sniffed at.
No.
That's not necessarily reflective of the amount you paid for PPI as well. And we'll probably talk about that later too, but you could get more than what you spent on that policy. It's well worth doing, and as we'll explain, it's relatively straightforward to do, and you can do it for free without paying anybody a cut of the PPI that you're owed.
So who exactly might be eligible for PPI?
I think it's worth breaking this down into two components. You've got people who are missold. So I gave an example when I worked at one of the banks of how, quite frankly, staff would tick a box even though the customer said no. That's mis-selling.
Yeah.
Other examples would be you were told it's compulsory in order to get this loan. No, it wasn't compulsory. Another example, again, going back to my experience at the bank, I saw this a lot. people who weren't actually eligible to claim in certain circumstances, being told, because quite frankly the staff selling them weren't given the rules themselves. So suitability wasn't properly assessed. That's mis-selling. You shouldn't have had it. And if you're successful, you get your money back plus the interest you paid on that money, plus an additional essentially compensation interest of 8% on top of that. But there's another category. Just having had PPI, even if you wanted it, you may be due money back.
Really?
This is a rule called plevin. Plevin is a bit of jargon. It's the name of a person that made a successful claim a few years ago, but it's used in the industry. What it means is lenders were taking way too much commission. On loans, the typical commission was around 2/3 of the actual price.
Really?
So let's say you paid out £1,000 worth of PPI, £670 of that would be commission to the lender. The regulator says 50% was acceptable. That's probably too high, but hey. So what they're saying is anything between 50 and what the lender actually got, you're due back. Now, in reality, you're not going to know what the commission was because it was undisclosed. That's the problem. It's when when the commission is undisclosed, that's when you're due it.
Right.
So often making a claim is the only way to find out.
Right.
But I would still suggest people claim, if it's a new claim under mis-selling.
Okay.
If you think you were mis-sold, because you will be assessed, well, assuming the banks stick by the rules, you will be assessed for mis-selling. If that were to fail, they need, by the rules, to assess you under plevin, which is a smaller payout. Nevertheless, could be a payout.
So better to claim under mis-sold than go straight to plevin.
If you're a new claimant, but if you're, interestingly with plevin, it does open the door for people who were turned down for mis-selling, and they reckon there was about 1.2 million people that, as of this time last year, who would have been written to, who had a claim for mis-selling rejected, who now can reclaim under plevin, whether you were written to or not, and you were turned down for mis-selling, even if the ombudsman, the adjudicator, the independent adjudicator, said no, the bank was right, you can still make a plevin claim in that case.
And this is a relatively kind of new twist in the saga, isn't it, plevin? It's only been a few years since this really reared its head. So you may have been aware of PPI mis-selling years and years ago and been proactive and put in a claim and had that rejected, but you could still go again under this ruling.
Interesting. People have been getting in touch with their questions. If you'd like to get in touch, just comment below with your questions. We'll put them to our experts. Harpreet's got in touch to say, I had a business loan and was told cover was compulsory. I've made a formal PPI claim and it's been denied by the bank, which was Lloyds, as they said it was necessary, but I really felt pressured into taking it and they wouldn't give me the loan without it. Do I have any further claims? It sounds to me like this could be plevin.
No, but the principle's the same.
Right.
As a personal loan or a business loan, if you were mis-sold PPI because the product was misrepresented to you, or as Guy was saying, a box was ticked, or you were told it was mandatory when actually it wasn't, then the principle is the same. You should be able to make a claim. It does depend on the complexity of the business that you had. Was it a limited company? In that case, is it directors that should have made a claim rather than you yourself? Right. So it depends on the scenario that you're in. It can be a little more complicated, but the principle of it is, whether it's a personal loan or a business loan, if PPI was missold to you and misrepresented to you, then you should be able to make a claim.
So if it's been denied by the bank, what's the next step?
There is a safety net called the Financial Ombudsman Service, and this is a fantastic consumer protection. It's there to adjudicate disputes between financial firms and consumers, and it's that kind of last hurrah for a consumer if they're not satisfied with the outcome of a complaint that they've made to a financial firm. So the first step is you make a complaint to the bank, the building society, the lender that sold you the product, and then if that's rejected and you think it was unfairly rejected, you can escalate that onto the Financial Ombudsman Service. Right. And they are a group of independent adjudicators who can assess your claim, assess the bank's reasoning for reject that claim, and make an adjudication as to whether or not it saw that as a fair decision or an unfair decision, and potentially the decision could swing your way.
Can I just butt in there? And they've got a lot of work on, haven't they? Because banks scandalously reject reasonable complaints.
Really?
We often see it.
What, just hoping that they'll sort of go away and...
Yeah, you have to ask them, but guessing so. So it's they missold to you first, and now they're saying, no, you can't have your own money back.
Yeah.
Rubbing salt into the wound. But I agree with you, but Ombudsman is an incredibly useful tool for consumers.
Yes, absolutely. And, banks have been fined quite heavily by the regulator over the years for unfairly assessing complaints and pushing them onto the financial ombudsman unnecessarily. So, yes, you're right. They do have a lot of work cut out for them at the moment, but they do a good job.
So Andy said, I had an old Abbey National endowment mortgage, so could I claim off Santander? And also, what about old Laura Ashley store card accounts and Next Directory accounts?
So Abbey National, yes. If you were sold PPI with an Abbey National loan, then yes, you would go to Santander. Similarly with Laura Ashley store cards as well, they were provided by Santander, and you can make a claim with them. Next Directory accounts are a little more complicated. Okay. So originally they were run by a firm called PA (GI), and that was part of Royal and Son Alliance.
Right.
And then Royal and Son Alliance was bought by a company called the Phoenix Group, and that's ultimately the company that you would go and direct your complaint to. Right. Now, in fairness, if you Google Next Directory store card PPI, the first result you should see, and don't click on anything that's an ad from a claims management company, should be for the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, and it will have the details of that store card and who you make the complaint to, and telephone number and a postal address on there as well. So regulators done its bit to make it a little bit easier for people to figure out who they need to make that complaint directly to. But what that does say is that trying to figure out, especially when you're going back into the annals of your financial past, trying to figure out who exactly did you actually hold an account with can be really complicated when you've got this complex web of companies that were owned by companies that have subsequently gone bust or been bought by other companies. Yeah. You need to go on this little crumb trail to figure out who do I make a claim to.
Yeah. Pete's been in touch on Twitter to ask if you can claim PPI for relatives who've passed away. So does eligibility extend to the deceased?
You can. What would happen is if you're successful, the money would go to the estate. So whoever inherits that money would get that money, obviously subject to everything else that goes on in the estate. Yeah. But in theory, yes.
Okay, that's good. So let's talk about how you claim back PPI, because it's actually very, very quick and easy, especially if you use one of our tools. We've actually got a short video about how you can claim back PPI for free, which we'll show you now.
Ignore all those annoying PPI claims adverts and cold calls. You don't need to pay anyone to get back the money you were owed. Making a claim is both free and easy. Which research shows people are put off by the prospect of complicated and lengthy paperwork, but our new free tool takes less time to use than boiling a kettle. It's supported by high street banks, has no long forms to fill in, doesn't need paperwork to get your complaint underway, and best of all, there's absolutely no cost. The banks have set aside billions of pounds to refund people like you. But the financial regulator has just set a new deadline for all claims to be complete, August 29th, 2019. After this date, no more claims can be made. So if you took out any kind of loan, credit card or mortgage in the 1990s or 2000s, grab a cup of tea and get your PPI claim underway today. The clock's ticking.
So that video was, of course, talking about the Which tool that you can find on our website, but MoneySavingExpert has a similar tool, doesn't it?
We do indeed.
Yes.
Nice and simple. We, in conjunction with a company called Resolver. So you go on the tool, you put in your details, it then, through its back-end systems, pushes that onto the bank. Through the tool, you find out the results, and crucially, because you can go to the financial ombudsman if the bank building society says no. If you choose to, it will automatically escalate it to the ombudsman. So it's nice and simple. Yeah. And as you quite rightly said, don't use a claims management company. They could take a third of your money. The amount of work it takes to fill in one of these tools
It's about 5 minutes, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's
And
so worth it.
It's the same as the work you do giving the claims management company your details anyway.
Yeah.
So just do it yourself.
Yeah. So Janie's got in touch to say, I haven't got any records of it, but I'm sure I had PPI. Where do I start?
We can help you. Both Which and MoneySavingExpert have done the hard work in creating template letters, so that give you the words that you need, and all you need to do is pop in the name of the provider that you're thinking of firing out a letter to, so that you can at least start that journey. Banks, building societies, lenders have an obligation to share information with you. They don't always hold records for going back decades and decades, but we've got template letters on our websites that will have everything that you need to fire off to a bank and say, I think I've got a claim, but I don't have my records. Can you send me my records? And so you can start to see whether or not you've had PPI with that company.
And it's one of the most common questions we get at MoneySavingExpert, I would add, and also just how, even if you've got the records, how do I know? How do I find out if I had it?
Yeah.
And it's a case of going through meticulously old credit card, loan, mortgage statements, looking for those buzzwords: PPI, payment protection insurance, protected loan, ASU. Now, what does ASU mean? Accident, sickness, and unemployment, because that's what it typically covered. Some of the jargon to look for in your statements, because you might well have those lying about. I just want to read you an email as well that we got this week from someone who didn't think they ever had PPI, and they said, "We believe we never had PPI till we saw you tell everyone to check. We've turned out we had 3 policies over the last 20 years,
3,
and got £5,000 back.
Really?
Wow. Cheers."
There you go.
Wow.
Not everyone is going to have that sort of success, but this is not uncommon, this sort of email. So quite often you might get a pleasant surprise.
It's also worth having a look at your credit report, and you can do that for free. You can actually do that on MoneySavingExpert's site. You can do that with Experian. You can do that with ClearScore, which is backed by Equifax. That's another credit reference agency. And there's also another free tool called Noddle that allows you to check your credit report for free. So you can see who you've had financial relationships in the past, who you might have borrowed from, and that can again be another route through to seeing whether or not you took out PPI with the company.
Another question from Phil, who's in a similar position. This is a bit of a tricky one. He says he had a store card account that had PPI, but he can't trace the company who operated it. He's written to them and they've said they can't find him. Have you got any advice for him?
It is an odd one. One of the options that he has is to contact the underwriter. Now, this is the kind of department that makes a decision as to whether or not that organisation is going to lend to you. So, for example, if you had a store card with a high street store and you contacted that high street store, they're probably not going to have that record of you.
Yeah.
But the underwriter, the underlying provider, and the decision maker on giving you that credit may well be that person. So again, the FCA probably will have the details of who was the underwriter and who was the kind of lender behind that store card, and then you can go directly to them and contact them and see if they've got your details.
It just brings me back to the mis-selling at the start. This is one of the problems. You went to a high street store to buy a pair of jeans or shirt, whatever it is. You paid for it. You end up with PPI because they sold you a store card.
Yeah.
And they whack the PPI on top. And these are shop assistants. Now, there's nothing wrong with shop assistants. Like there's nothing wrong with call centre staff when they're students. But people selling it. Me as a call centre staff 20 years ago wasn't trained. I suspect it's the same in the high street.
And now, talking of skeletons in your closet, I am a former shop assistant, and I broke records for opening up store cards for people.
Really?
At the age of 16, I was doing this, 16 and 17. And I remember being on the phone, calling up the underwriter there, making sure that person was legitimate, putting in all their financial details. And I walked off with loads of vouchers for the store as my reward. And that was it. That's all it was in for me. But yes, again, that's the route through, and that's how people ended up with these things.
If only we knew then what we know now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I regret it.
It's amazing that it was allowed to happen with no training given.
Absolutely.
It's really crazy. Right, well, let's take some more questions. We've got loads coming in. If you do want to get your questions answered, just comment and I'll put them to Gareth and Guy. This is from Steve. He says, previously I've had an IVA. However, it's been cleared with a completion certificate of December 2017. I have 4 confirmed accounts with PPI. Can I still claim?
I've got an answer. I'm going to simplify a complex thing. And what I'm about to say applies to bankruptcies as well.
Okay.
You possibly can claim, but the likelihood is anything you get, you won't keep. Because the reason you're bankrupt to have an IVA is you owe somebody else money.
Right.
And you may well have to pay some of this back to other lenders, for example. It's
considered an asset. So if you have that asset and you could have made that PPI claim prior to entering into an IVA or during that IVA, that claim is considered for the IVA company. Some people see PPI as a windfall, like the term windfall. It's great. Oh, I've got this windfall, PPI payout. Now that wouldn't be claimed by an IVA. So if you won the lottery, you inherited money and you were out and you were complete in your IVA, you wouldn't have to give that over to the company. But PPI isn't actually treated that way. It's treated as an asset.
Because it's your money.
Exactly.
Right, okay. James has said, if you make a PPI claim that's unsuccessful, can this harm your credit score?
You'll be okay.
Yeah.
You need to...
I would have thought that as well.
Applying for credit, not paying back on time, not being on the electoral roll, those are things that can harm your credit score.
Okay.
Claiming PPI, whether successful or not, no.
Yeah, financial complaints to firms aren't on your credit record, but the relationships you have with financial firms and utility companies are on your credit record.
But like you said, using the credit record is a great way to find out who your relationships were. You might have forgotten them. I probably can't remember, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, all of my relationships with credit firms.
So Lee has said, how far can you go back for PPI claims? And Margaret's also said, clear score only goes back 6 years. So how do you get information before then?
Well, in theory, you can go back as far as you like.
Okay.
But it does get trickier as you go back. 2005 is an interesting point because 2005 is when the current regulator, the FCA, started regulating the sale of PPI and other types of insurance. Certainly to the level it does now. There was a form of regulation before that. So anything before then, they won't be able to cover it all. So the Ombudsman doesn't come into play in quite the same way.
Okay.
But that was 13 years ago.
13, sorry.
So certainly for the last 13 years, it's easier. 6 years is often a point people talk about because it's easier to, if you don't have paperwork, it's easier to get that from lenders for the last 6 years.
Right.
You mentioned credit reports. They will have any relationships that were active within the last 6 years on your credit file. So in theory, as far back as you like, but
you have to have that information sort of at home then, do you?
To an extent. I mean, the bank, if you ask the bank, did I have PPI, they need to give you an honest answer.
Yeah.
The truth is, back in 1990, let's say, that particular bank may have got rid of your records.
Right.
It may not even exist anymore.
That's true.
Okay. So it's worth trying.
But I'm sure we've both heard of people that have used our tools and sites and have had PPI going back into the 1990s and made successful claims.
But the reason it's a slightly wishy-washy answer is there is no definitive 1999 yes, 2005 no. It's not that definitive. The further back you go, the lesser your chances.
Right. Okay. The question from William, I like this one. He said, do you think the regulator will have learned anything from the handling of this PPI mess and next time make institutions just refund people up front, thereby doing away with nasty claims management companies, annoying TV ads and even more intrusive nuisance phone calls?
Well, I think the first thing to say is we hope there's not a next time.
No.
Because this has been an absolutely gargantuan financial scandal that's rumbled on for years and years and years. I mean, there was a smaller, very similar mis-selling issue a few years ago with card protection plans. So if you lost your it's basically insurance to cover anything that would happen if you lost or had your debit or credit card stolen. That was offered by a company called CPP. And what the regulator did was initiated an entire redress scheme that was that made sure that the only communication and relationships were between the insurance provider and the customers. So effectively, claims management companies couldn't get involved in the process. It was a little bit messy. I'm sure not everybody who was eligible to claim ended up doing it, because it relied on people being contacted about opting into the redress scheme, and then there were lots of back and forths before payouts started happening. So it wasn't perfect, but it was in a little microcosm. It was an example of how a redress from a financial scandal could be handled without this explosion of claims management companies and people eating into your compensation for not doing all that much.
Do you know what I hope they learn from is they started regulating in 2005. It was around 2011 when they really, really got tough.
Yeah.
But those 6 years, it was going on. There were fines for some banks, but there wasn't. The fines were tiny compared to the amount of money they were making. They were making millions of pounds. Why didn't they act faster in those 6 years? I can remember thinking that at the time. So hopefully what they do learn, I know it's probably previous members of staff compared to who's there now, but I do hope they learn those lessons. If we see something similar, clamp down on it quicker.
Yeah. You are watching Ask the Experts. It's exactly a year until the PPI deadline, so we're having a PPI special. I'm going to fly through the questions. Adam has asked, will a CMC be more likely to win a claim for me, or shall I just send a claim in myself for free?
We probably answered that.
I think we've answered that, Adam.
Use our tools.
Use our tools, yeah.
And keep all the money, keep all your money.
So this is from Stacey. I took out a loan from Lombard, I think about 12 years ago, and was told it was compulsory. I've not got the foggiest how to claim, and I don't want to go through one of those companies that take commission. Can I still claim? Lombard?
I mean, it's like what we talked about earlier with the store cards. It's finding out, I don't actually know myself who would have underwritten those, but it's finding out who the actual financial institution behind that particular product was and making a claim through that company.
And again, that information, if you weren't listening earlier, that information is on the FCA's website. So you should be able to find telephone number, a web address that takes you straight through to the PPI claim page. You don't have to navigate through their site, and a postal address on there as well.
Thank you. This is from Murdo. Does this include mortgage companies selling NHS personnel PPI that pays mortgage if you're ill, even though NHS people get full pay for the first 6 months? MPPI,
as it's known, now there has been some issues with that, but by and large, it's not been the same as PPI, which has been primarily sold against credit cards and loans and mortgages, but MPPI is quite a valuable product to have. Now, sold against different professions, I mean, it depends on your company, but actually it's quite a sensible thing to take out some form of cover when you're borrowing tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds to buy a house. The thing a mortgage broker, if you speak to one, will always say to you is, have you got life insurance? What's going to happen if you or your partner die, and who's going to be able to repay the mortgage? So it's not an insensible thing to be offered some form of protection when you take out a mortgage. As for the NHS or any other company that offers you generous benefits if you're off sick, it's still really valuable to have some form of protection.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, apologies if I slightly misheard it, but quite often, like you say, Gareth, your employer may offer some form of protection. They had to ask, part of the suitability questions for PPIs, do you already have something in place? If I read that right, they may have, and they got and they were sold a separate policy.
Yeah.
Well, they shouldn't have been sold that separate policy. That's mis-selling, because they weren't. Their suitability wasn't actually, quite frankly, wasn't asked.
Right.
It was such a simple. I'll go back to it again. It was such a simple process. It shouldn't have been a simple process.
Yeah.
Selling PPI, because it costs thousands of pounds. It shouldn't have been 2 minutes at the end of a phone call about, your balance on your credit card.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
This is from Sean. If a decision has been refused years ago and you didn't take it to an ombudsman, can you go back and say, and you go back and they say nothing, can you sort of take it to an ombudsman again?
Well, you've got 6 months.
Right, okay, 6 months.
From whenever the decision was.
I see.
But
okay.
what I would say, I saw another question, I don't know if we'll get to it. which is, can I, I dispute the answer.
Yeah.
I know they offered me 1,000, I should have got 2,000.
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
But it's really important to remember that time limit that you have from getting a decision to actually using the Ombudsman, because you don't want to fall foul of that time limit.
So even more important then, since we've only got a year to get those claims in as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it gets really complicated after 6 months. I mean, unless you've got a really valid reason for not putting in that claim, say you were severely incapacitated, you were really ill, and that's why you couldn't make it. But did the person say 12 years? No.
Just years ago. Yeah.
Tricky.
It's going to be tricky, isn't it?
Yeah.
But hopefully, if we broaden that out, there might be people watching who are in that window.
Yeah.
Where it's only been a couple of months or so.
Really not got much time. I'm going to fly through just a few more questions. This is from Christine. She says, I had PPI and Lloyds keep saying I didn't. I don't have the paperwork, but the bank statement shows the debit from my account each month. Any advice on what I can do next?
That sounds, well, if they had it sounds like an error on Lloyds' part. But if Lloyds have made a mistake, this is where the Ombudsman comes in.
Right.
So the Ombudsman is there for, I had it, was I missold or not? Bank says no, you can go to the Ombudsman and hopefully it gets overturned. Likewise, if the bank is denying you had a policy, which you did have, assuming that's correct, of course, that's where the Ombudsman comes in.
Right. Okay. A question from Helen. I've had the same bank account for the last 25 years with Nationwide, but they've come back to say no record of any PPI from the account. I don't have any paper statements as I shredded them all 7 years ago. How would I get them to check again? I'm sure I've had cards in the past that have had PPI and I've always used the same account. I'm not sure what to do.
If they've said, to an extent, you have to take them on the word because you have no other evidence.
Right.
Nationwide wasn't one of the worst offenders.
Mm-hmm.
The likes of Lloyds have paid out a lot more, which suggests they may have been one of the worst offenders. I'm guessing they didn't have PPI.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the banks have done and building societies, they've done a lot of harm with the mis-selling of PPI, but at this point, you'd hope that they've checked their records and they're telling you the truth.
Yeah.
Not trying to mis-sell you that you don't have a claim.
It's interesting because there is an element of trust there, isn't there?
Of course,
If you don't have the paperwork, you are reliant upon that bank. And like anything, similar matters, if you're going to court for something else completely different, you need to have a certain level of proof, don't you?
It's difficult because I shred a lot of my paperwork as well, but I suppose you just never know when you might need it in the future. Because you want to keep things secure, but then you also want to keep everything.
I've got this folder, it's that thick.
Really?
I don't know how many years ago back.
Right, well that is all we've got time for. Thank you to everyone who got involved with your questions. If you have any questions that we didn't get time to answer, we will try our very best to answer them after the show. Thank you so much, Gareth and Guy. It's been lovely having you on. And make sure, honestly, check out our website, check out the Money Saving Expert website. There's so much information that will help you and tools to help you make a claim because you just never know, do you?
Absolutely.
We will be back in 2 weeks' time for our next instalment of Ask the Expert, so make sure you tune in then. Until then, have a good week and a weekend, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.